Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this new Project Zomboid video guide for modding. In this video, we're going to focus on scripts. More specifically, what we refer to as ZedScripts, and not Lua scripts. Scripts are not a programming language, but are a format that the game uses to define different elements of the game. This is mostly used to define items most of the time, is what you need in your mods. You can also define models, which you will need for your items, vehicles, you can define sounds, and way more. To get started, you can find more information in the scripts wiki page. So go in the official Project Zomboid wiki and either click this page here, or you can search it manually in the search tool by typing scripts. So, like I mentioned before, scripts are not a programming language. They use a very specific format, and the file where you define the scripts themselves don't really follow a specific extension file like the Lua scripts, for example. So your scripts will be placed in your media folder, and more specifically in the subfolder scripts. They need to finish with the extension .txt, and they can be named anything, any way you want, with spaces. And I think you can also use special characters, but probably don't do that, please. It's kind of cursed. So your scripts, something important to remember is that when you put them in the script folder, they will overwrite script files that have the same name. So in this case, say you have a mod with media scripts, and this is a script.txt file. If another mod has this exact script file, they will both clash together. And one will overwrite the other this way. And this means you can also overwrite the vanilla files, but you really shouldn't do that. Because when you try to overwrite the vanilla files, they usually contain hundreds of items, and so it means you need to basically overwrite a whole file just to modify one item, for example. There's solutions for that, and we're going to see these a bit later. So the syntax of script files, they don't really, like in build 41, they didn't really have a consistent format. Sometimes it was a bit weird, random, like sometimes the separator between parameters and values could be a semicolon, but it can also be an equal sign. In build 42, ZenDistone kind of improved that a lot by making it way more consistent. So you will rarely have cases of script blocks, that we call script blocks, that follow weird formats. What the scripts usually apparent to is a sort of tables in a way, similar to Lua tables, where you use the curly brackets to surround other parameters or other blocks. So the scripts, when they are written, they use what we call script blocks, and you have many types that are available. You can find a list of them here in this section, the script types, and here is a list of most of the script types that you can use in your mods. So you have, for example, item, a model, recipes for build 41, not for build 42, and you have craft recipe, which is for the build 42. Okay, so how do you actually make a script? Let's open an example mod to show you how it's done. Okay, so here we are with a very simple example mod structure. If you want to learn how to what you need to set up to have your mod recognized in game, make sure to watch my video on the mod structure. And you can also find a wiki page called mod structure that details how you can define a new mod. In the versioning folder, the 42 folder, let's create a subfolder called media and another subfolder called scripts. In this script folder, like we saw before, we're going to put all scripts. In this case, I could simply put my script here, but it's suggested to have a subfolder that's named after your mod. So that way, any script files you put in there, whatever name they are less likely to clash with other mods. Let's create a simple example script file, and don't forget the extension .txt. To create a simple script, we can use one of the most common script blocks, which is the module block. You can find more information about it here, which details what you can do with it. So usually when you define an item, it needs to be in a module, and this is the same for models, for vehicles, sounds, and most of the script types. There's a few cases of block types that don't depend on this module, mostly when it comes to tiles, usually, if I remember right. But most of the time, this is what you want to use. So as we said, we have a sort of table-like structure with two curly brackets, the module, so the name of the block type, and following an ID. The ID is not necessary for every block types. It depends. This is something that will be documented on specific pages on the wiki, and if you don't find documentation for this block, don't hesitate to search in the game files. So in this module base, we can, for example, define an item which has a specific ID and the curly brackets again. In this item, we can define properties. For example, item type is equal base food. And there's more parameters that you need to define for your item for it to be properly recognized and defined in the game. If you forget necessary parameters, your game might crash or might just straight up not launch based on the mistake you made. When you define a parameter value combo, you need the parameter, equal, and the value. But most importantly, you need to finish with a comma. This is necessary. If you forget the comma, the game doesn't read this line, and so it will be ignored. So in this case, we saw the module base. This is the module the game uses to define its items. But in your case, it's best that you use a custom ID. So for example, you can name it after your mod. The reason for that is, say we have our item, my ID, in the base module, and another mod names its items the same. So say for example on AK-47 in your mod, its full type, basically its full ID, will be base.AK47 when referred in game. But if another mod defines an AK-47 item with the same module, both items will clash together. What will happen is there will be a soft override. This is something we will see a bit later in the video. So what is suggested to do is simply use a custom module. So you can name it after your mod. This way it's unique. One block which is commonly used in mods but usually not properly understood is the imports module. In this case, this block type, it doesn't have an ID, and you simply add it in a module. So say we copy this in our mod here, and you can import other modules. What this means is, say we have a parameter 1 as an example, which takes an item as an entry, which is, say, in other mod, the mod item as an example. You can simply remove this part with the imports module. But this will also usually not work because scripts can be very inconsistent in their typing. Like I said before in the introduction, the scripts were improved in build 42, but they are still very inconsistent in some elements, and this is one aspect of it. If you don't want to make a mistake, simply keep the module. It's best that you do this instead of using of being dependent on this import block, which is inconsistent and sometimes doesn't work and is quite unclear when it's actually useful. You also have no point importing base because base is already available by default. Like when you refer, say, an item this way, which is from the vanilla game, the game will search for this item by automatically adding the base module, usually. So you can simply remove this, and it's best that you simply return the item by using its module first, or the overmod module, or whatever. The VS Code syntax highlight, this is something we will see a bit later. So let's continue on the properties of scripts. A script block can have different properties, as we saw and as we discussed a bit. It can have an ID, for example, but most importantly, it will most of the time require a parent block. In the example of module doesn't depend on a parent block. It needs to be in the core file here, this way. If you put it in another block, say for example, a module in another module this way, this will not work. This will cause you problems. So you can't do that. So module can't have any parent block, but some script block need to have a parent block. As we mentioned before, the item block with your item ID needs to have the module parent block. But in the same way, item can be, say, in a vehicle script block. So these are rules which are dependent on the script block you're working with. For example, a craft recipe block needs to have an input block in it. So it needs to have a mandatory children block, but the input block needs to have a craft recipe parent block. You need to follow these rules when you create your scripts. And some blocks can be in multiple parent blocks, so they can have different blocks. The item block needs to be in the module, but I believe you have the attachment block, which can be in vehicle or the model script blocks. You can find more detail in the wiki pages of these specific script types in the wiki. Usually it will tell you more information about what parent block they are dependent on. So say here, for example, the craft recipe block needs to have a parent block module, and it can have the following children blocks, so inputs, overlay mapper, outputs, item mappers, etc. As we mentioned before too, a block can have an ID, and sometimes it doesn't require one. The item and module block need one, but the imports block doesn't need one. So same thing, you can find more information in the specific pages of the script blocks. And as always, if it's not properly documented on the wiki, don't hesitate to search in the game files. If you know you have a script block with a specific name, don't hesitate to search this specific block in the game files to find examples from the base game. We also mentioned before file overrides. So if two script files have the same path, they will usually overwrite each other's. The vanilla files are loaded first, and so your mod files will overwrite the vanilla files. And if you're clashing with another mod, it should be dependent on the load order. This is not something you want to do. So let's go into base game files to show you what I mean by that. Okay, so here we are in the game files. In the media folder of the game files, we have the scripts folder, like in your mod, and here we have different subfolders that you are not forced to use. These are not necessary in your own mods. This is how the game organizes its files. If we go into items and we open the drainable file, you can see it defines items in the module base. Say we want to override this specific item. We could overwrite this singular file in your own mod, by using the same relative folder. So we create a generated folder, an item subfolder, and the drainable.txt. We copy this whole file and we put it in our mod, and this will technically work, okay? This will work, but you really don't want to do that. The reason is if we scroll in this file, you will realize there's quite a lot of lines. And this isn't even one of the worst ones. If we go in the food item, for example, you can see there's tens of thousands of lines, and you really don't want to overwrite this whole file. Because say you want to overwrite this specific item, you need to overwrite every single items. And if you do that, you will be a problem to the base game and to everyone. The reason is, say the game now removes an item in your own mod, unless you update it to remove this item too, you will keep this item in your mod. And this is really, really bad. And in the same way, say this item gets a modified property, so say the weight is doubled, for example. In your own mod, you override this item, but you forgot you also override this item, and this item, and this item, and this one, and this one, and every single one. And so you really don't want to overwrite a whole file. But you may ask, how do we actually modify an item then? How do we overwrite an item? Well, that's where it becomes interesting, because there's methods to do that. So, as we said, either you overwrite the file itself, bad solution, don't do that, or we can do it from Lua. So Lua has methods to overwrite items, or we can also do it with soft overrides. Here. Okay, so let's go over both of these solutions. Let's start with the Lua overrides. Let's go in the Java docs, which are used for the Lua API. You can find them here at this wiki page. Let's go in the build 42.1. And let's open it. Here, I'm going to search for get script manager. This is a function you will use to basically retrieve the class which handles all the script in the game. It's a global function that you can use in your Lua API. It will give you a script manager class this way. And in here, you can find different script types and modify them. So as you can see, you can get a list of all evolved recipes, craft recipes, and everything. In the same way, you can find an item from its ID. If you do that, it will give you an item class. And in this item class, it will be basically the script reference that you defined in your mod or in the vanilla files, in the vanilla script files, items. In this, you can find different methods to modify scripts, and you get all the properties of an item. So you can use that to get specific property of an item, or you can modify by using do param. This allows you to basically modify a specific parameter with a new value. So say we want to modify the weight of this item. Let's create a simple Lua file to show you how you can do that. Let's do it in the server because it will be loaded when we launch the save. And let's create a simple example Lua file. Of course, make sure to name it properly or it will clash with other files. You can simply retrieve the script manager. I will name it SM, get script manager. You can retrieve a specific item reference by doing find item. If we go back in the Java docs, here, find item. We know our item will be in the base module, so we reference it this way. Let's retrieve its ID, can row. And this way, we should be able to do param the weight and a new value. So say we want it to be 1.6. This way. And this is how you can simply modify an existing item. Another fancy way to do it, however, is to use the third method, which is soft overrides. So what does this do? If we go back to our item script, we could simply, let's say, copy this item reference in our own mode here, put it back in the same module, and this should technically override the item, no? Well, not really. It won't do that. In build 41, it did. If you redefine the item with a new script file, it will override the existing item. But now in build 42, we've got a fancy new thing, which is called soft overrides. This has advantages and disadvantages, because this means you can't overwrite a whole reference for an item, but you can modify specific properties this way. So when we do that in our mod, this won't override the original item reference. This won't recreate a new one, a fresh one, with all modified values. For example, here we can put 100. But instead, this will take each properties and modify this specific property value in the item reference that already exists. So say we want to modify weight, we can put 1.6, and this will override this specific parameter in the original script. But if we do that, we will also override the icon, the days range, and other properties. We don't want to do that. And so we can simply remove them, and this will modify this specific parameter in the original item script file. This has the disadvantages that, let's say this item is removed from the game now, this way. In your own mode, you're going to have a problem where you create a new item because it technically no longer exists in the game, and with a singular parameter, and this may crash the game. So this is a bit problematic, but it's basically dependent on you to updating this. If that's something that scares you, you can use the Lua method, which will be a bit safer, because in here you can verify that item was found before running do param on it, and this won't crash the game. It's two solutions. One is very easy to do, and one is a bit more complex, but a bit more flexible too. So the thing with script override, soft overrides, is that they are not available for every script blocks. So we know right now that they are available for item, but also for craft recipes. But there's some specific blocks that don't have this property. So in a craft recipe, if we go in its wiki page, you will notice that we need an inputs children block, like we mentioned a bit before, which we add in here. But the inputs script block doesn't support soft override. So you can't modify specific inputs by redefining this same inputs block this way. And so you need to use other methods, which are usually documented on the wiki pages for the specific script types. For craft recipe, it's documented in modifying existing recipes, but you can still use the soft override method for the parameters defined in the craft recipe block. Say we want to modify the time of the craft recipe. We don't need to go through Lua to do that. We could, you probably can, but you can simply do a soft override the same way to just override this specific parameter. So you may have noticed in my VS Code window for the game files here that I actually have some colors for the scripts. This is not native to VS Code. The reason is that, well, this is not a programming language, so Visual Studio Code doesn't know what this is. And this is something I've been working on, which is available, and it's a continuation of an existing extension, which adds syntax highlight for scripts and diagnostics. And in this same way, you can hover parameters with your cursor and it will give you descriptions. However, it's a bit incomplete. So right now you may not have descriptions available for parameters. If you want to contribute to this, I will show you a bit later how. So the extension used here is called ZedScripts. You can find it here by searching the wiki page ZedScripts. And this extension, this will tell you how you can install it. It will simply highlight stuff. So if we search it in VS Code, you can find it here under my name. But by default, when you open a file, it won't have this, it may not have this extension activated for this specific file. It should automatically detect it. It should automatically detect that you're in the scripts folder. But if it doesn't, it's not too much of a problem, okay? You can activate it manually. So let's set this back to plain text. And to activate it, you need to do Ctrl-Shift-P. This will open you this simple prompt. You search for change language mode this way. And in here, you need to select ZedScripts. And this will highlight everything for you. And you can find more information this way by hovering. If you make a mistake in your creation of a script, say for example you forgot the comma here, it will tell you about it. And in the same way, let's say you forgot an ID in your item block, it will tell you about it too. But now say you want to add a description to parameters, which is missing, and you want to help contribute to it. You can contribute to it directly in the dataset used by this extension, which, if we go in the wiki, is called ZedScripts data. And this has a GitHub repository, and you can modify any data and contribute to it, if that's something you're interested in. Okay, so this was a simple video introduction to scripts, but scripts can go way deeper than this. So based on what you're trying to do, if you're trying to make an item, a vehicle, a recipe, you might need different informations. So make sure to check my other videos. I might have made a video on specifically what you're trying to do, but if you don't find more information, check the wiki and go in the script types and find the script block you need to use and find information about it in the specific page for it. If you need more help, make sure to check the Project Zomboid modding community, which you can find in the wiki here, this way. You can come and ask any questions you want if you need more help. You can also pass by the official Project Zomboid Discord. There's a mod development channel where you can ask questions. Or if you've got specific questions, you can also ask them in the comments and I may respond to you. Thank you for watching this video, and we'll see each other in the next video.